if your phone goes off, it's a $50 fine. Good morning, fellow directors, those in the audience, staff. We have an echo, so if you can check your microphones, please. First of all, I would like to acknowledge with gratitude that CBRD is on the ancestral territories of the Quetzin, Malahat, Subasit, Halalt, Penelakut, Sneminis, Layaxin, Pakwichin, Dididot, and Pachidot nations, whose people have walked gently here for thousands of years. And prior to going into the agenda, it's a somber day today. We still have an echo. If you can check your microphones, please. 23 years ago today that the world changed, and we all recall where we were on that day of 9/11. So I hope that you will join me in a moment's silence, remembering all those who lost their lives during that horrendous time. And with that, we will move on. I would like to acknowledge Director Callio, or whatever pronunciation you wish to use, he will answer to. He is taking the place of Director Toporowski, who has taken a leave for other opportunities. So welcome. And I see Director Martman online. Welcome, Director Martman, and Director Acton online as well. Ms. Boyd, without further ado, please.
Thank you, Chair. May I please have the approval of the agenda?
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you. Committee of the Whole meeting minutes of July 24th, that the minutes of the Committee of the Whole meeting of July 24th be adopted.
Mr. Martman, are there any errors or omissions that you came across there? You're giving me the thumbs up, so you're moving that. Do I have a seconder? Moved and seconded. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. I move to public input period. Looking at the gallery, I don't see anybody here for public input period. We can move on to delegations if you wish.
Absolutely. I think we'll save the public input for the chair.
Thank you. We have Diane Hinton, a coordinator from Cowichan Coalition to Address Homelessness, Cowichan Housing Association, regarding the vision, wellness, and solution to address homelessness and affordability. For information.
Good morning. As per our policies, you have 10 minutes. If you need more, I will reach out to my fellow directors and get approval to extend that if you do need it. Let's do it prior. So moved and seconded to extend if need be. All in favor? Opposed, if any? The floor is yours, ma'am.
Thank you. So I come not alone, but with a delegation of sorts. The work of the coalition. My name's Diane Hinton, and I am a member of the Cowichan Housing Association, a very new member of that small and mighty team. But my job, my responsibilities are to reinvigorate the coalition that's been around for some time and worked really hard through the pandemic and is now being reinvigorated. And the work of the coalition is done on the basis of what we call collective impact. And so it is in that way that we realize when we all work together, we see the greatest impact. And so today I come with you with a team. And first up, I think, is Michelle. I thought the presentation would be here. It'll come, okay. So Mayor Staples is going to speak first for us. Provide you with some context. Thank you.
Are they putting the slideshow up? Okay.
The presentation will come up shortly.
Which slide are we supposed to be on? Should just be this.
It's not.
It's not changing slides. Anyone?
There we are.
Okay.
It's working now.
All right. This may be a little bit unorthodox for me to be coming and standing up here and speaking. I could sit down at my chair and speak to this, but I don't have a video camera that works, so it makes more sense for me to be here. The reason that I'm part of this and the reason that I'm speaking this today to you today about this is because the coalition prior to the pandemic was something where there was liaisons appointed to the coalition. That is something the coalition will be working on again, to have reappointed liaisons. And I have the history piece because I've been involved from then until now. And so I'm here to just set the stage a bit. And so part of that stage and part of that story is a story about in 2016, the BC government declared an emergency on overdoses in the province. They did that based on 995 deaths in a year. We are now at over 2,500 deaths a year in BC. So that state of an emergency has turned and gone well beyond a state of crisis. And in our communities, all of our communities, but focused mainly in the central area, we're feeling that crisis. We're experiencing it every day. And around 2019, we started to come together to form a plan for how do we deal with this. Just before I became mayor, I went to a meeting with former Mayor Phil Kent because of what was happening downtown Duncan specifically at that time. And there was a room full of really upset people at what was happening. There are still rooms full of really upset people talking about what is happening. But since then, I have attended more funerals for overdoses and had to sit with more parents who've lost their children and more families, including just last Sunday when I was at yet another celebration of life for someone who passed away due to the toxic drug supply. And I can't tell you, and I'm sure many of you know, what it's like to have to sit in that place and to look out on our streets and our communities and wonder what is it that isn't happening in this state of an emergency. So we came together in 2019 with the coalition to come up with a plan for our region, not just the center, but for our region, about what is happening and how do we address it. At that time, we came up with a plan that was informed by people who were living on the streets. There was something called Street School that was operated by Councillor Middlemiss at that time, who was not a councillor at that time, Stacey Middlemiss. And they had come up, when I was first elected as mayor, I went to Street School. There was people who are no longer around this table that came as well to Street School to hear what people needed. And what they said was they needed a place to just live, to be safe, to be able to sleep. And that they could just have a tent somewhere where there was toilets and there was basic things that people would need. And then they could build up from there. And so we put together a plan as a region. And that plan was very comprehensive. At that time, there was about 119 people unhoused. And there was a plan from the people who were the hardest to house, who actually just needed to be dealt with the criminal system. There was people a percentage of people in there who just needed to be dealt with by the mental health system, which we do not have enough support for, as we all know, in our communities. There was about 70% of the people who would work in that model of having a place, which we've now created, which is called the Village. that people could go and they could move from. And so we created a plan to house everyone. We presented it, we came together from every sector across, with nonprofits, local government, nations, MLA, MPs, everyone came together, presented at the province, and we were sent a nice formal letter saying no. Sorry, there's nothing that we can do to support this at this time. But what we did have was during the pandemic, when we called BC Housing and said, what are you going to do about, people who are unhoused when people need to be in place during this pandemic? And they said, well, we want communities to come up with a plan. And I said, like the plan that we already gave you that you said no to, we already have that plan. So we came together again. We formed the COVID Coalition, of which myself and John Horn, who's here, at that time was the executive director at Cowichan Housing, and we were the co-chairs of the COVID Task Force to End Homelessness. And guess what? In under 4 months, we did. We had a time in our community where everyone was housed because of that plan that we had. And as we moved through the pandemic, and all of us who were there can attest to this, what worked was that we all worked together, was that the other levels of government said, what do you need as a community? And we got to implement what we needed. And it worked. And then what happened after the pandemic, where those doors started to close again. That funding wasn't available. That crisis wasn't available, and yet we're in a crisis that keeps growing. And so that is some of the history of why we came here today, or why we're coming today to start this presentation, to share this information, because we've now looked at the numbers, which you'll hear soon, and said, what do we need now to house everyone in our community and support them? And that is what is going to be presented today. But we know that the best story that we can write is the one where we're all writing it together to solve this. And I know it's possible because I've lived it. And what frustrates me more than anything is going and sitting in those places with people who have passed, who are out on the streets, knowing that it's because some of the people decided to pull out of that book and stop writing it together. And that's the only way forward. It's the only thing that's worked. And I'm going to now pass it on to the next speaker to take you into the present. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. So as Michelle said, being unified is what makes us strong as a community. And many of the successes in Cowichan, even outside of this crisis, demonstrate that. They're the result of working together towards shared goals. Earlier this year, we gathered with many of the folks who are providing direct service in our community, and we heard from them what it was that they thought was needed right now, sort of a repeat of that question. And we did our best to reflect what they told us in this that you'll see today. And so we want to share with you our solution, what we see as a potential solution to this crisis, and leave it with you. We have other processes that we have to go through to make this formal, but we want to leave this with you for your consideration, and then we can come back to you with an ask. What we need is for this to be seen as a regional plan. This is not limited to the City of Duncan. This is not limited to the municipality of North Cowichan. This issue is across the region. And so it's our intention for this to be representative of a regional solution where we're all unified. What you'll see in your package is a 3-phase plan that we expect will address the immediate needs, the short-term and the longer-term things that we can do to resolve this crisis. And as I said, we have some processes that we will be going through formally, and then we'll be back. I also said that we work with a collective impact philosophy, and so we work together. And Cindy Lise of our Cowichan is a very proud member of the coalition. Here's some of the partnerships that are involved in working together on this. And Cindy, as much as anyone, is acutely aware of the current reality that our community faces. And so she's here today to sort of share some of those numbers.
Before you start, Ms. Lise, I want to congratulate you on your award recently.
Thank you.
most appropriate.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a surprise and an honor, so thank you for acknowledging me. And what I would like to say is that the award, for folks who don't know, was the King Charles III Coronation Medal. I could not do that without collective impact. I could not accomplish or be a part of things in this community without this community. And so I think there are many folks who are equally as deserving. And I was the one who received a medal on your behalf, actually, is what I would like to say. Before I begin, I would just like to share with you that there's some edits to the PowerPoint presentation because the wording can get a little bit confusing. And so what I'm going to do is not share on the screen the two slides. You have them in front of you. And I'm going to speak to the paper that you have in front of you. And I'll just leave this partnership slide up in front of you at this time. So our current situation, Mayor Staples reported that we had over 900 people a year dying from the poison pandemic, and now we're up to 2,500 a year in BC. I'm going to talk to you about our local data for Cowichan. And so there have been two pieces of work that have been done recently. One, the 2023 point-in-time count, which covered the Central Core and some of our outlying communities. And that point in time is done one day to capture as much information as can be done in that day. What we know is that one day is never enough, and it doesn't really tell the whole story. And so in late 2023, December of 2023, the service providers who care for people in our community came together to do a deeper dive into the needs of our community. And so those numbers are different, but I want you to know why. And that when the service providers came together, they were looking at people who are currently unhoused in the Central Core. This was not including the Lake Cowichan, Ladysmith, and perimeter areas. But who were either unhoused or precariously housed and being supported by those service providers in the community. And at that time, 423 people were identified as unhoused or residing in shelters, the village, and Squamall in this central area. The 2023 point-in-time count indicated that 223 people were captured on that day. But what we also want to share with you, because today is also about myth-busting, is that most of those people are from our region, right? They are our community members who have often grown up or resided here for a long period of time. 23% of the people who were identified on that one day were actually from Lake Cowichan. They come to the Central Core for services. 46% of those who were unhoused at the point-in-time count were Indigenous. And of that 46%, 17 people were between the ages of 13 and 18. 13 and 18 years old. These are our children. It is estimated that 3,000 people in this region are less than a paycheck away from being unhoused. 3,000 people are on that razor blade edge. Our current situation for shelter, and it is extremely limited. We have 36 beds at Warmland. We have 24 beds for women at the Cedar Branches shelter. For cold weather, or extreme cold weather, we can add 15 additional beds to Warmland shelter. And currently, and we're hoping that there's a solution on the cusp, there is no current extreme weather shelter identified. So look at those numbers and think about what we have to offer in this community. It is directly known that over 300 people require permanent housing. In 2023, 444 unique individuals sheltered at Warmland. And what is crazy is 80 people were over the age of 60, and the oldest was 77. So these are seniors, some of these are seniors in our community, a larger population are seniors in our community who are requiring housing. And what we also know is that seniors' residential care and assisted living are not able to support people with mental health and complex needs in those centers. So our current situation also for supported housing, the village offers 34 units. Squamall, 52 units. The Warmland bunkhouse apartment has 24 spaces. Someday, we hope 26, 27, we don't know, but the White Road supported housing will provide 48 units. And currently, Duncan Manor operates or provides 120 units for seniors 55 plus who can be low income or people who are struggling with physical or mental health challenges and need support with independent living. That's what we have in Cowichan. That's our current situation. Think about the numbers and what we currently have. I'm going to bring up John Horn because we actually think our community knows what's needed, and John's going to fill you on the next part.
Welcome back, John.
All right. So I'm here today with my social planning hat on, just to talk a little bit about my colleagues have described the nature and extent of the issues we face. And while it may seem rather daunting, I think we know that there are solutions to these things. We know that partly because we've pioneered those solutions here in the Valley, some of them. And we know that also because everywhere across Canada is dealing with the same issue. And lots of the communities we talk to on a daily basis have implemented solutions as well. So we think there's a way out of this. And I'd like to talk just a little bit about, in a very broad way, what we see that as looking like. So as a planner, I can say that what we want to see in our community is the investment by our senior levels of government in the kind of social infrastructure that's going to tackle these things head on. As a planner, I can also say that almost all social infrastructure, which is a nice big word, really devolves down to land, buildings, and skilled humans. So you'll see those are the three components that we reference throughout the rest of the presentation on the plan. So what we do also want to be aware of and recognize is that this is a situation that has some urgency to it. It's incumbent upon us to act quickly and effectively in terms of addressing these things. So if you look at the first phase of our plan, it's a 1 to 3 year frame. We'd like to move very quickly towards providing stable housing and supports to folks so we can address the key issues. We know that folks who are living outdoors, it's a distressing experience to live out there. We're cognizant that the longer they stay out there, the harder their lives get. So we want to respond to their needs quickly. But we also know that this situation and the difficulties they face aren't just confined to the folks who are on the streets. This affects our business community. This affects our residents who live in the community. So there's a lot of people under pressure as a result of this issue, and we want to move quickly to relieve those pressure points. So as you'll see, there's three kind of phases in the first part of this operation, phase 1 to 3, years 1 to 3. We want those quick, temporary supported solutions. And if you think about the pandemic that Michelle referenced, when we were able to move from 185 people on our streets to almost nobody on our streets within about a 4 or 6 week period. It was very quick. We want to have that urgency and that quickness in our response. And so you'll see that part of our temporary supported solutions is sites for village-type residential options for folks that can be fired up very quickly and then will accommodate most of the folks who live on our streets right now. You'll see that we have a couple of sites identified there for the village-style developments, but also recognizing that There's a group of people who live in RVs and in cars in our community. They hang around parking spots here, there, and everywhere, and routinely I get calls about, can we move those folks along? They have nowhere to go, and none of the RV parks will take them. Their units are too old, they live in their vans, this sort of thing. So we want to recognize that those folks also need support, and part of that temporary supported solution would look like giving them a legitimate place to go and park their vehicles and RVs with, proper facilities and washrooms and water and power and that sort of stuff, but a legitimate place to land rather than moving from parking spot to parking spot day after day. That must be exhausting for them, and it certainly is for our staff. We'd also look at that. What do you do with that? You have the sites to put those things on, but you also need to service those sites. So you'll see below that we have some money that would be set aside for things like purchasing modular housing units, put them on the site, servicing sites, etc. So that's the sort of infrastructure part that goes to the real estate. Thank you. Lastly, of course, nothing happens without good, skilled staff in this world. You have lots of complex people, lots of challenges that they face. All these solutions really do have a component that speaks to the support of skilled professionals that help folks get to the place they need to be and help our community move through these issues effectively. We're also looking at shelter space. We have that discussion ongoing in this community at the moment about the lack of shelter space. We do need to look at the increase in homelessness in our community. It does require us to, enhance our shelter capacity, so that's certainly part of that immediate piece. We're looking at least 30 more beds. As we know, that's only going to take a little nibble out of the entire population that has nowhere to go at night times. But it's a start. You have to renovate those spaces, and again, you need cultural-informed, trauma-informed, skilled staff. We have a treatment component because one of the routes out of homelessness may be to seek sobriety and treatment for an addictions issue. And that piece is, of course, very important. We want people to move towards health and wellness and have that capacity in our valley to offer them that solution. This year is a picture of the of the village. We think it's a splendid model, and we'd like to see more of that. So just to say that, when we did that, no one else in British Columbia had tackled that problem in that way. Now, we had a lot of resistance from BC Housing when we approached them initially to say, we want to do this village-style development. And they were like, no, that's crazy, we don't do that. BC Housing has now adopted that as the model that they use, the Hearth and Heart program. Nanaimo is now implementing a village-style program. Kelowna is doing it. Kamloops is doing it. So BC Housing has looked at the results we generated with that project, has seen it as a model for the rest of the province, and is now funding that in other communities. So it is quite a turnaround and a reflection of, I think that we got most of that right, and BC Housing has seen that in practice and has adopted that model. So that's, I think, a testament to the innovation that we've developed in this valley on that file. So the second phase, because this is a 3-phase program, is really that interim period, 2 to 4 years. We wanted to make sure that we're paying attention to everyone in the valley. So not just folks who are distressed and homeless, but let's talk about seniors, for example. There was a stat thrown out about how many seniors are presenting at our shelters. Well, we have in Nanaimo pioneered a couple of models where we developed multi-bed residential facilities for seniors. We took over some old seniors assisted living facilities and turned them into essentially rooming houses. And that model really worked well. It was a low rent. People had to share kitchen facilities, but it was a way of providing affordable, sustainable housing for folks on really low incomes. So we would like to see some more of that kind of action where we're supporting our seniors effectively by providing them with realistic options. We do have to do some renovations to those buildings to make them appropriate for that use. And then, again, we did have staff support to ensure that people were successful in those settings. So we want to provide those supports to seniors. We recognize that also income supports, as the rents go up, it is more and more difficult for folks to afford the rents in this community. We all know that that cost doesn't go down over time. It generally trends up. So we want to look at infrastructure that develops income supports for people so they can just pay the rent and they don't have to rely on the government to go find them an affordable housing project somewhere. Outreach supports, of course, we have lots of people out there. We want to provide those skilled staff to enhance our response to mental health concerns, to addictions, for all those sort of things. So that outreach piece, which we do in this valley already, we want to enhance that to ensure that people are getting the right connections to the right skilled staff to help them move towards health and wellness, essentially. So phase 3 is we need more permanent solutions that are not just temporary, of course. We want to have a longer term vision. We all know how long it takes to put up an apartment building in any community in British Columbia. It takes years to get a building up. So we want to be cognizant that we should have a long-term goal of building permanent and purpose-built options that also address the issues of addictions, mental health, and homelessness. So supportive housing, we want a couple more of those, please. They're not cheap to have and they're not easy to get, but we certainly would need more of those in our community. We need skilled staff to support those buildings in being good neighbors, as well as being effective in moving people towards wellness and health. We want second stage housing because supportive housing is a stop on the continuum towards wellness, and sometimes people need to move along to more appropriate settings, and that can be our second stage housing, particularly for those folks who've embraced sobriety. And they need to find a place where they can be sober and be amongst other people who embrace sobriety as well. So that second stage housing includes a housing that's appropriate for where you are in your journey out of homelessness and towards wellness. So some of those sites, we're looking for how do we acquire sites for second stage housing. And then lastly, of course, the affordability of housing is a driver of some of the issues that we face. So affordable housing is a natural component of this. We'd like to move forward as we go to look at how can we create more affordable housing units in this community, and that will also take some of the stress off. So those are the areas that we're looking at: the short term, the medium, and the long term. The capital infrastructure of land, buildings, and then that operational infrastructure of skilled and supportive staff who can, really help people move towards that successful outcome. So that is the overall vision. Those numbers are there, very broad. We just took sort of stabs at how much land costs and how much buildings cost. But generically, what we're trying to say is that a comprehensive plan for the social infrastructure in this community needs to have all those components in it. And we need to be effective in being able to advocate to our provincial and federal partners about investments in those kind of infrastructures. So that unity around the ask and that comprehensiveness of the plan, I think, is the key. And within that, there's lots of flexibility about the wheres, the whens, the hows, and the whos. But the general principle is we want to seek a significant investment in this community and the social infrastructure to address the crises that my colleagues have described for you today. So I think I'm passing the baton, I believe. So.
Thank you, John. So Aaron, Cindy gave you a lot of numbers, and I think Aaron is going to bring some humanness to some of those numbers.
Good morning. I'm much shorter than everybody else. My name is Erin Capella. I'm the mental health manager for Cowichan Tribes. I'm also the lead for Cowichan Tribes opioid crisis response. So anything to do with mental health, addictions, toxic drugs, and unhoused ends up on my desk. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about some of the magic that we have actually seen at the Village, because the Village is a very special place that seems to have found a sweet spot of solving a lot of issues in ways that we didn't anticipate initially. The history of the Village was a pandemic response, and we went from tents to little sheds and into these independent little pods, kind of the stage 3, I guess. And working together, we actually have an opportunity to change the story. So much concern, worry, and despair comes from seeing people suffering on the street. We're worried about them, we're worried about our community. Obviously, there's concern from business and neighbors as well. When the Village was first opening, there was a lot of resistance to it, and that has really, really changed as the Village has created this magical little community. And what we've collectively created with the low barrier housing at the Village is saving lives, and it's supporting wellness. We know what works, and we do know why it works. So the Village is actually a low barrier recovery housing project. It is a decolonizing model that takes into consideration land-based preferences, institutional trauma, and cultural inclusion. There are many of our unhoused people who really don't feel comfortable in large box-like Western housing structures, especially if people have been in and out of jail. Going into a big institutional building can be very scary. We have at the Village elder visits, cultural supports, and a lot of creative activities, such as the community gardens, and also what you can see in this photo here is part of the memorial garden, where the residents there have built memorials to some of their lost friends and family. So instead of aiming for independence, which is kind of our classic Western model of we want everybody to graduate to living alone in a box, we're more looking at aiming for community integration, reintegration, family connection, and that sense of belonging. Even the design of the village, it's got these like flower petal pods, where there's like 11 here, 12, creates a natural sense of connection without pressure, right? People can just cross paths naturally. The external bathrooms and food distribution by staff, the pods are just sleeping pods. You have a bed, a wardrobe, a little desk, table, but you don't have washrooms and kitchens in these pods. And what that does is it means that staff get their eyes on residents more frequently and quite naturally as people are continuously leaving their pod and going outside. It also substantially decreases the risk of fire and flood. We know if there's an issue or a flood in these large buildings, you can lose an entire floor, and all of a sudden you'll have 10, 15 people displaced. In the pods, if you wreck one, you've only wrecked one. And the repair cost on one little pod versus 15 units of supported housing is very, very different. There's also a kind of casual peer monitoring system that happens on site at the village that's very similar to like dorm life or siblings of like, you've been in there too long. So you get this natural eyes on each other and just community connection. And we should know from everything that happened through COVID that isolation is not good for anyone's mental health. We need connection. We don't do well as human beings isolated all by ourselves. And our most vulnerable citizens need that connection as well. So community-based research done by Cowichan Tribes has found that the low barrier pod housing is an essential first step on the road to recovery for many of our most vulnerable citizens. What we've seen is a substantial decrease in the rate of fatal drug poisonings among pod housing residents. The overdose rates at the village are extraordinarily low. We average in any health delivery area across BC we lose about 40 people per 100,000 residents in an area. Vancouver Island is one of the higher trending. We lose a lot of people here. But it does tend to be around that 40 people per 100,000. There have only been 4 overdoses, fatal overdoses at the village since it opened in March of 2022. Right? The eyes on people, the community connection, the cultural support, the way things are working is effectively keeping the overdose rates very, very low. We're not losing people when they're living at the village. There is a substantial increase in the rate of community members in the pod housing seeking help for addictions, going to residential treatment. 1 in 5 residents have accessed treatment. Other substance use has dramatically decreased. They're connected to medical and health supports. We know that when somebody is street entrenched, you've got about a 1% shot of getting them into residential treatment, whereas we've got 20% at the village. So it's very different. But also 100% of the residents are connected to health services. So whatever that looks like, sometimes that's dealing with chronic health. Sometimes it's getting cancer treatment, wound care, right? Like a lot of other health issues that do come up. Crime went down in the neighborhood by 18%. 88% of residents are engaged in peer work and employment, caring for the neighborhood and providing outreach, which creates a safer community for everybody. I know we've heard at various points in times, like, well, where are the peers? Are they coming? I kind of miss them. Are they coming to patrol the parking lot? We like them. We see an increase in connections to family, culture, and community supports. There's a substantial decrease in the rate of violence, especially in gender-based violence, and the female residents report feeling safe to sleep without fear for the first time in years. There's a decrease in the spread of drug paraphernalia in community by providing a central point for drug pickup, for making sure that things are kept clean and safe. The Peers Cleanup community goes around a couple times a day. And there is a massively improved access to health services for residents. So the village received 14,000 service provider visits to the site between March of 2022 and December of 2023. Those rates continue. You've got all of the Island Health outreach teams, Cowichan Tribes outreach team, treatment coordinators, connecting to residential treatment. We have a culturally grounded treatment program that our bus goes and picks up residents every day. So you have all of the health providers can go to the village. On a service provider budget, it means you can send one staff instead of two, and you're not spending 3 hours texting each other being, hey, have you seen so-and-so? Right, there's a lot of just efficiency of service delivery. So the cost of service providers has reduced. There's been a 75% reduction in emergency department visits for village residents. And it's an essential precursor to treatment and recovery. You know, residents report that now I'm supported, now I'm ready. What we see is this within a couple of months, it doesn't take very long. Once people move in, they stabilize their sleep schedule, right? If you think just how well you feel after 5 days of not getting any sleep. For people who are unhoused, they're never sleeping, right? You're constantly on the move, you're constantly on guard. And very quickly, we see people go into bed. They're like, no, man, I'm not staying up, I'm tired, I'm going to bed. And you get the regular sleep schedule, you get regular meals, and just overall health dramatically improves when you're sleeping at night and eating during the day. Support for addictions, physical, chronic health issues, mental health needs, reducing drug use, and then building that sense of belonging and community. So there is magic in the structure of the village. The design of it really matters. The supports that are there are absolutely essential. I want to share a couple stories of former village residents. This first one says, the village helped me get to the life I dreamt of for years. Their partnership with Cowichan Tribes and the treatment team was exactly what I needed at the right time. The village saved my life, helping me to stay out of the cold. I would have froze to death for sure by now. My place there was safe and secure. I knew there were good people watching out for me and a roof over my head to call my own. Staff was always really good to me. It took me a couple of times to get it right, but staying at the village made it possible for me to connect with the right people. With the support from the staff at the village and tribes putting together a plan for me to go to treatment, graduate, and then continue working for myself at a sober living house. The village has always given me input on my journey to success, growth, and sobriety. I'm still living clean and sober and strong enough to keep it that way. I'm happy and proud of what I've done, working and planning on going to school next. This former resident is actually managing a second stage house for a treatment center on the Lower Mainland now. It's been about a year. And this is another story. This is of I'll just read it. It's a young woman. I was homeless for 2.5 years after coming out of a 7-year abusive relationship, losing my younger children to MCFD, and then COVID happened. I got laid off, lost our place in a fire, and addiction took over. I overdosed 7 times in 7 days. I was self-harming too. When I moved into the village, I started doing peer support work and needle cleanup on site and around Duncan. I found out I was pregnant, and I tried to slow down my using as much as I could without getting sick. I was able to get prenatal care at the village from public health. I gave birth in Victoria, and my baby was off morphine within 2 weeks. I had a whole team of support from tribes, public health, House of Friendship, and the village staff helping me. My team worked with the social workers to get me into the Home for Honorable Mothers and keep my baby. My older son comes to visit me at the house on weekends. Instead of going away to treatment and being away from my baby, I was supported to attend the Southcut program at Tribes. It helped me get stronger in my sobriety, gave me a new circle of friends, and know that I'm not the only one. I really enjoy the cultural program. It gives me a chance to learn my children's culture. I've been attending the program for a year now, and I'm grateful to have celebrated 1 year of sobriety. And that is one story. We have other Indigenous women who were able to get support and prenatal care when pregnant at the village and keep their babies. So there's an aspect of, we know that when especially young moms are supported with the support that they need in that really vulnerable place, that we can make incredible progress in intergenerational healing. Because supporting these young families to stay together, that's what prevents us from dealing with this with the next generation, right? These are babies that have their families, they have the connection, and they are supported with dignity, with love, with care. So we know what works, and we know we can do it. So we know that first picture, what that looks like. We've all seen it. It is distressing to look at. It can feel overwhelming. It can feel really hopeless of what do we do? And we have an option to create what we have created in the village and support people and support our community to write a different story. Thank you. Who's wrapping up? You are?
Thank you, Erin. So, as I said earlier, we do have some processes to go to. We want to take this back to the coalition, who gave us the information to prepare this in the first place, but we want to formally go back to them. We will be going to Cowichan Tribes. We want to have that conversation about the liaison direct to the coalition, not necessarily to Cowichan Housing, but direct to the coalition. Eventually, we'll be back with an ask. And the things that we think would be helpful is that this is recognized as a regional plan that we can all agree to and endorse. We hope for some support with advocacy, because we will be looking to the province and to the feds for investments in our community, in our region. And then ultimately, there are some things that are sort of within the control of local government in terms of supportive zoning and supportive bylaws. So this is not the last of us. You'll see us again. And I thank you for all your time.
Thank you very much. Once the presentation comes down, I'll be able to see if there's anyone online. I do have a growing speakers list. While I'm looking around, is there anyone that I missed? I don't see anyone online, so I'll start with Director Justice, then Stone, then Director Douglas, Wilson, and Morrison. So Director Justice, please.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't realize I would be the first speaker, and but I'd very much like to thank you all for the work you're doing on behalf of the region. I think it's a really great idea to come at this in a unified way. The question I wanted to ask you, excuse me, was that, you know, the 423 people in 2024 who are homeless is going to be a growing number if the trends continue as they have. So the question is, does this plan and the quantity of need, particularly in the medium and long term, does that anticipate the continued growth in homelessness as we've seen happen over the last little while? And I guess, what is the thinking on the other half of this, which is dealing with the primary causes of homelessness that are leading to these growing numbers?
Thank you. I don't know formally. Am I supposed to speak right? Okay. So I think, yes, this is very, I guess, sort of reactive, a plan that needs to be done. It's very visible. People are dying. So we need to do something now for those people, get them out of the river that they've fallen into. Absolutely. You know, I'm speaking on behalf of the coalition, but our intention is to work on preventing those people from falling into the river in the first place. Absolutely. This is just, a plan to get us out of where we are right now. So we do have to plan for, there will be a greater number of people facing homelessness, and we're also planning to do what we can to support folks from falling into that circumstance. The best way to address homelessness is to prevent it in the first place. So yes, and this is still needed.
Thank you. Still waiting for the presentation to come down. Hopefully that can be accommodated on our end. There it goes. I have Director Stone next.
I don't have any questions, just to share some gratitude and appreciation. questions do come to mind, but based on the experience of the coalition and the work that had been done through COVID and sort of the framework of the plan that's presented here, I'd like to share my support for it. Looking at the number of, I guess my only feedback is hopefully it doesn't take 10 years, right? If you look at the sheer volume of money available across the province and across the country right now for housing initiatives and homelessness, it should be able to raise the capital, make the investments that are needed, and hopefully do it in a way that's faster than 10 years. My frustration with senior levels of government has been the sheer amount of money that is allocated being spent on the lowest form of supports and triage, while not investing in the mid and longer term, the next stages of support and treatment and housing that's needed to actually like stem the tide, if you will. And I have to share my gratitude that the stories are tough to hear, but also hopeful. And it does show what can be done when people are given the opportunity. I know it's hard for people to see how their own lives are impacted when you walk through town, and people's threats to safety and things. Those are all real issues that folks deal with, but it pales in comparison to the sheer horror of the lived experience of people that are on the streets. Yeah, I'll have more to say in a minute.
I can come back to you, Director Stone, if need be. We'll move to Director Douglas next, please.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, through you to the presenters, I want to thank you for all your work in bringing this forward to the board. As was noted in your slides, there's, I think, 25 different organizations involved, and the fact they were all able to work together and to come before us with this unified voice and this ask is impressive, and I think it's going to put us in a much better position in terms of advocacy going forward. And I'd say in my experience the last couple of years, in terms of our advocacy to the senior levels of government, one of the challenges I've found is not being able to present that unified voice. So, I mean, the Mayor of Duncan and I have worked together in terms of jointly presenting, say, to the Premier and the ministers at the Union of BC Municipalities. But if we're able to all endorse this document and say that, hey, all our entire region, all the municipalities, the nations, the different service providers are all in agreement, this is what we need, I think it's going to make us a lot more effective in those efforts, especially going to these decision makers and explaining to them we have a problem. They're hearing the same thing from so many other communities, but if we can walk in with a solution and with some specifics in terms of land and buildings and operational supports, I think it's going to put us in a much stronger position, and that's thanks to you folks for putting all the effort into bringing this forward. Of course, yeah.
Thank you. And I think, to both points, having that unified voice is, we think, critical, and also having that continuum of supports. So there was mention in there of, a universal basic income and rent subsidy. So we're trying not to just think bricks and mortar, and trying not to just think it, be as broad across the continuum as we can be, and be as unified as we can be.
Absolutely, please do.
So I was really glad to see in the presentation the focus on treatment as one of the solutions. And I know as the Duncan Mayor pointed out in her initial comments that we are dealing with a housing homelessness crisis, but also a drug crisis as well with the overdoses we've seen since 2016. With that, I think it was in the immediate steps was the recommendation to look at the 20-bed treatment facility. I know Mr. Horn has had some success with that approach in his experience in Nanaimo. I just wondered if Mr. Horn might be able to share with the board kind of his thoughts on how that can be an effective way of helping some of these folks get on the right path.
Yes, thanks for that. So obviously, that part of the spectrum of response, I guess, is critical. And for those folks, you heard some of those stories today about how some people were able to move out of their addictions and have that raising their children in a healthy environment, et cetera. So that's really key. So we are in discussions with some of the service providers who are seasoned veterans in the provision of treatment services. And some of the things that they've talked about is that they're wanting to expand the number of treatment beds available in this community so people don't have to leave their home community to seek treatment. And also, one of the things they've said to us is it's key that when people finish their treatment program, that they have stable housing to move into. So often they see folks leaving their treatment programs. They don't have adequate housing. They find themselves back into the environment they came from. That triggers them to reuse again, and then it all falls apart. So their message to us is that in support of that treatment option, we do need to provide that option for folks to move into regular housing that does support them in maintaining their sobriety. So they're very interested in providing that service to the Cowichan Valley. They see us as underserved. We have a lot of private beds in this part of the world, but they're out of reach for most of the folks that we're trying to help on the streets. So that's a key piece, and I think we're going to be successful in establishing more options for folks who are in the Valley and want to maintain their residence here in the Valley, seek treatment in the Valley, seek a housing option that's appropriate for them when they graduate from treatment, and maintain those family connections and those ties to this community. So our goal is to keep people here in our community, provide them with treatment options, provide them with housing options that support the treatment outcomes. And that's conversations we're having right now with providers, and I think we should be, hopefully, once we get past the electoral provincial stuff, that we'll be able to nail down some agreements with our provincial government about supporting that component of the plan right away. So I hope to see some outcomes in the short-term future on that. So.
And a final one, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The last question was with regards to, there was the slide on mental health supports, and I know as many of us have discussed, we're dealing with the issues with the toxic drug crisis, the lack of housing, but also that mental health crisis that's impacting so many people. There's been a lot of talk lately about the closure of Riverview and Port Coquitlam and the impacts that's had in terms of folks who would have been based at that facility or who would have been using those services today if it was still open. And I'm wondering if the coalition's given any thought to maybe refining that ask in terms of the mental health supports, rather to say, it's not just that we want the services, but maybe we want a facility like a mini Riverview. Because my understanding was when the province, through successive administrations, indicated they were going to shut down Riverview, that the promise was that those supports would be provided more at a community-based level, which I think many would argue didn't really materialize. Although there are some mental health support sites throughout the region that are funded through Island Health. It's not at the scale, obviously, that's needed when you look at the challenges that a lot of the unhoused population are currently dealing with. But if I could ask Ms. Horn or one of the other presenters if there has been any thought to having an actual facility with those mental health supports.
I might turn to my colleague Erin, who might be more au fait with what the current, I would say I was part of the discharge team that emptied the folks out of Riverview back in my early days as a social worker, and the commitment from the government at the time was we will provide community supports. That patently did not happen. I can attest to that firsthand, and it's unfortunate, but maybe I'll ask Erin to comment on where the trends are going in the mental health treatment services. So.
Yeah, so there is an aspect in this plan of when we're looking at the low barrier housing and the supportive housing it is a combination of what do people need to actually meet their particular needs. A lot of those are going to be mental health needs. What exists currently, you have a couple private treatment centers. You've got Cedars and Cobble Hill, and you've got some private beds here and there. Those are all quite short-term treatment. As John was saying, you go in for 6, 8, maybe 10 or 12 weeks tops, and then where do you go after that? So I would say, do the supports exist currently for really severe mental health needs? Not really. We have a lot of incredible outreach teams on the ground. Island Health has their Suit and ACT team that work on this stuff on a daily basis and get people housed as best as they can and supported through outreach teams. But it continues to be a need, and it is reflected in the second stage and support of like, how do we create that continuum of care that meets the needs for people that in an actual appropriate way, right? And those are vastly different, but we know when we meet the social determinants of health of basic shelter, food, and safety, a lot of those mental health needs come way down, right? We have a lot less distress when we're not constantly putting out crisis fires. So I don't know if that answers your question. We need way more treatment beds, and we need supportive housing for people to come back into in a safe way.
Thank you very much. I'll put you back at the bottom there, Director Stone. I have Director Wilson, Morrison, Segal, and then yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to everyone that's taken part in this presentation. It's good to see Mr. Horn again after such a long time. I think one of the key phrases that's in the presentation was on page 13, which basically said, when properly resourced, there is hope. That's the one that gets to me the most, because without hope, I don't see any escape route, and this is what you're providing here is some hope there. I think in this particular case, Director Stone and Director Douglas have both said the same thing. One has mentioned the frustration with dealing with senior levels of government, and another has mentioned the challenges of working with senior levels of government, and that's where I have a real problem. You guys are fully aware of what's going on the street, and you've got proposals which have worked and are still working. But do you have any sense of, I'll be careful what I say here, do you have any sense of how aware the ministries, the senior levels of government are of the situation? Do they share your real concerns, or are they just mouthing the words? That's probably the easiest way I can put it, because I'm
Boy,
quite
did I get the loaded question.
Oh, who's gonna take that one?
I
You
mean,
want
I
me
think,
to answer that politically, or shall we go? No.
well, John wants to speak, and I want him to, and Michelle. But I definitely think being unified is one of the keys. So being unified is one of our keys. They're throwing a lot of money at it, so if we can take advantage of that, that would be great. Michelle can say more.
So we've all been to conferences, and we've all been to sessions on this issue. And we've seen the lineups from people across the province. We go to mayor's luncheons and mayor's meetings, and there are lineups from people across BC and across Canada when we go to FCM talking about this. So there's absolutely no chance that they couldn't know what we're facing, because they're hearing it not only from us, but from constituents, they hear it from everywhere. What the struggle that I've seen, the challenge that I've seen is that we have a plan as a region. So we invite the province and the federal government to sit down with us and say, this is what we need for our region. Victoria do the same, Nanaimo do the same, Port Alberni, Burnaby. It doesn't matter, Chase, anywhere where communities are facing this, which is almost everywhere, have regional plans. We have regional districts in BC, have plans for what we need to do in our communities. And then the governments have to, where we run into the issue is that there doesn't seem to be a mechanism for them to sit down and work with us across governments, across jurisdictions, and across ministries to actually deal with this. So that's where I see the problem. And I see that as a problem because I also saw when we had the pandemic, I got to live through the solution. And the solution is we worked together across ministries, across jurisdictions, across, levels of government, and we sat down and we said, our community needs this. And then we were supported to do that. And it worked. And so that's where it lies. It's not that it's not an awareness, it's that the way that the structure is created is not allowing us to provide what we actually need. And then it also starts to divide communities. And so from my experience, the best way forward is for us to, you know, when we're doing any kind of advocacy, is to advocate for those barriers to come back down and for community plans to be instated across Canada, but I'll speak for BC, across BC, so that we can actually implement this and solve this issue. The money is there, as Director Stone said. It's just, you know, this is not interconnected enough for it to work effectively. So that's what we need to really look at, is how do we make that happen? We know it can because we experienced it. So it is possible, and I have a great deal of hope, but it's breaking down those barriers. And it doesn't matter who's at those other levels of governments, whoever it is needs to work together with communities to do this, because that's the only way we're going to solve it. And we can't just do it in Cowichan. We could sure be a model, but also other places, we all need to do it. And so there's a lot of discussion about that, but that's where I think the problem lies, but also the solution.
Follow up, please, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, and you've hit the nail on the head here, the release of funds. The money is there. And working across ministries, we've hit a wall here of need and people who say, yeah, we've got plenty of money, but give it to us. And that's probably why I'll never go much further in local government. I'm not quite as diplomatic as I should be. I'm quite happy to go along and say, you've got the money, give it to us. Set me loose sometime, we'll see what we can do. Thank you.
Okay, going back to my speakers list, Director Morrison, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've made some notes here, and I'm happy and sad at the same time, in that happy that we've developed the expertise right here locally. And as Michelle had just said, that we've lived through a solution. We've got the package, and sad to say that it had to be developed here. The need is so great. I had a light bulb go off early in the presentation in discussing the professional visits to the village, and now I understand why we don't have the mental health and addiction support in the Cowichan Lake area, because a lot of those services are being provided here. And I think the combination of a certain amount of gentrification of the Cowichan Lake area has created the homelessness there that is now transported to this region, or this part of the region. So, yeah, light bulb went off, but I want to go specifically to the addictions recovery aspect of this. And you had mentioned the private beds, and I just don't see the provision of private addiction recovery as applicable to the situation that we have here. It is incredibly expensive. And I think that there's the possibility of providing those services without having to pay that kind of dollar that the private treatment facilities charge. So my question is what model of provision of services, addiction services, specifically detox, the short-term treatment, and then the longer-term maintenance of that? Because really the magic of somebody who's in recovery, and it was mentioned, the health improves, the general well-being, the thoughts about school and work, all those things come as a result of somebody having that opportunity to become clean and sober. So what's the model that you're looking at for the provision of those kinds of services?
Yeah, thanks. So we know that there's a few private facilities, and as Ian references, they're quite expensive. They're $775 a day to operate a bed in a place like Cedars, and the payment for a person attending Cedars is probably in the $50,000 range. So it's quite a bet. So, please step. But I just wanted to mention that in our discussions with providers, we've indicated that those price points are way too high, that no one can really afford that unless they come from a place where they have enough money. So that, for example, Cedars has funding from CMHA, Canadian Mental Health Association, so they provide 15 beds at Cedars that are funded through the provincial government, and they're no cost to the users. They have a second stream of funding, which they get from the provincial government as well, and they have another 10 or 12 beds that are funded. So they have a number of beds at Cedars that are free for the users, and they're subsidized by the government. The model that we're looking for and asking for in the Valley is those beds that are affordable and accessible to regular people in our community that don't have a spare $45,000 to pay for treatment, you know. So we really want that to be accessible and available, and really that low barrier aspect of I can go there even if I'm on an income assistance check. That's my only wealth that I have. So that's really the key. The model we're looking at is not the $775 a day model. It's the I have no money but I need treatment model, and that's where we're trying to get to, is providing those kind of options. So I will pass it over to the expert on treatment facilities, which is my colleague Erin.
Yeah, this is my fun spot. Okay. There are people everywhere who are struggling with substance use and addictions. The vast majority of losses due to toxic drugs are actually still young men working in the trades, alone in their homes. That is the demographic that is accessing private treatment centers, the ones like Cedars at that $700 and something a day. You know, that's going to require massive family support. The wait lists to get in on a public bed are sometimes 1 to 2 years. So calling it accessible, it's just not. Whereas when we're looking at this really vulnerable cohort of people who might be street entrenched or struggling with street level addictions or in these low barrier housing, we actually can't ethically take someone from the street and put them into an institution on a schedule, on a structure of a residential treatment center, and expect that that's going to go well. It doesn't. We have to stage people through. You know, if somebody's been sleeping rough and out on the street for years, right, the village is one of the reasons why it works is because they're still half outside. Right? You still have that. It's not too scary. It doesn't feel like an institution. And we still have this lingering idea that the answer to addiction is to go to treatment, like that will somehow be some magic pill. It's not. The success rates are not great, and we do have much better success when we're able to support people in their own community. And the number one factor in supporting people to get well and moving out of addictions and substance misuse is stable, safe, supportive housing, right? Without housing, we can't help people. And when people are housed, we can help them. We've got outreach teams, we've got addictions physicians, we've got Cowichan Tribes runs a culturally grounded day program that when somebody calls and says, I need to go to treatment, we go, great, come now. What do you want for lunch tomorrow? We'll pick you up. Right? We have that window when somebody says, I need help. We got 24 hours, right? It's a very short window. It is not a 1 to 2 year wait list. It is not sending people outside of community. And even the nature of getting well is developing trusting relationships with service providers, counselors, addictions physicians. And if you send people outside of their community, they're building relationships with people they don't know, and none of those relationships translate and transfer back to when they come home. So we're really looking at how do we support people in home, and if we have homes, we know how to do that. We're actually really, really good at it when we can wrap around support in community. There's been some great addictions research, especially in the past 10 years, on really framing, you know, the opposite of addiction is connection. We don't help people by isolating them further. We help people by bridging community integration and getting people feeling a sense of belonging and dignity and purpose as valuable members of our community. But I could talk about this for days.
I see he did touch on your sweet spot. Follow-up, Director Morrison?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up in that, you know, I get the fact that the high-priced treatment facilities that are in business, and they're in business, are often subsidized through insurance programs for people that are working and the likes. It's a different group of people that we're talking about here. And I just look at where there's opportunities and the amount of subsidy that goes to treatment facilities. It's a huge amount of money, and how much better and well spent it could be in a village setting, and the numbers that could be helped and reached through that. And so is there an opportunity to lobby to ensure that there's those organizations that are sending money to subsidize treatment in private treatment facilities, redirect that to the far more effective, and you hit all the right points. It's community, it's follow-up. How many people do we hear the stories of people that go to treatment, get out, and they relapse and they die because of the scenario of their body has changed so much. So that's the opportunity that I would look for and would work with anyone around that redirection of a huge amount of funds that could be so much more effectively used in this scenario.
And so I think it's in there. I can't remember which phase of it, but there's boosts to outreach supports. So I know it's in the plan.
Thank you. Director Segal?
Thank you. I just wanted to extend extreme gratitude to all of you and the work that you've been doing for many years and have brought to our table today. And I look forward to when you come back. And, I can't speak for everyone and how they will vote, but I think you'll find support here. I know from my relationships with everyone around this table, we are deeply, deeply compassionate and desperate to be able to find to be a part of the solution. And what really shines through for me is at the beginning, the mention of the village and how it was initially unpopular. And just for us at this table to remember that sometimes we need to make what seem like initially really unpopular decisions, but that we have examples of evidence now that that kind of decision to support something like the village provides huge benefit to our communities at all levels, businesses, those that are unhoused, parents walking their kids to school. It takes leaders, strong leaders like us at this table to really bring that community along. And so I look forward to when you come back. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have Director McClinton next.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick comment and then two questions. Personally, regionally, I don't know how this isn't our top priority. I know we're coming up to budget and we're going to be looking at possibly holding the line on some costs. I think this is, I'm not sure how this isn't our number one priority, but that's just my thoughts on it. So I'm certainly in support of it. My first career was sort of as a frontline worker. I worked at places like Seven Oaks and Vancouver General and the psych assessment, and it was really refreshing and inspiring to hear about a plan that seems to be working. So certainly in support of that. I'm just curious about, what might your detractors say, or is there blind spots, or is there things that they're in this plan that you guys are currently working on?
What might our detractors say? There are a lot of myths out there, and there's a lot of people who base how they feel on one thing that they see. So I think, for me, that's one of the big things, is that people have made up their minds that it looks like one thing, and it doesn't. It looks very different. It's as individual an issue as any other. So that's my gut response before I get to you.
I just have one thing to add, because there's the detractors that Diane's speaking of, but then there's also the detractors at other levels of government. And I think as a society, we need to revisit what we think it means to be housed. Because that, the uphill climb for getting the village to be accepted was that people didn't feel that that was an acceptable way to live, to which my response was always, so in front of that guy's business is okay. And so that, I think, is something that I know that our detractors say when we're having these conversations, that we have to really think about, because this way You know, there are going to be a certain demographic of people, there always has been in history, that need to be supported in different ways than the majority of people are comfortable being supported. And so I think that that's another piece as well.
Follow-up?
Follow up. And, you know what, if we're not able to secure funding from senior levels of government or the amount, like, is there a plan B? How do we move forward?
I've been sitting here. Plan forward is, you had the image of what we currently have and the image of what is possible. Plan forward, if we don't get support, we continue on where we are. And that's the harsh reality, and that those numbers will continue, and the people that we lose in our community will continue. Erin, in her presentation, we have lost 6 young people in Cowichan Tribes to the opioid pandemic since January of this year. Six young people under the age of 24, and we'll continue to do that. And so what we do know, our plan moving forward, is that we have a mighty, powerful community working collectively. And when you hear the thousands of visits to the village, we have the commitment of our community organizations to work together beyond local government, provincial government. We have community hand in hand with each other, meeting the needs of the people in the best way we can. What I can also say is that we have frontline teams that are facing another loss and another loss and another loss, and that we have employees and staff members who can't even get the strength to go to work for another day and face what they're facing. And so we're at a critical point in our community, in our agencies and our organizations on how long we can continue to work in the way that we are. And before the wheels fall out the bottom and nobody will work there, right? So these are things that we need to consider as a community and as decision makers moving forward. So that's my little piece. Oh, yes. Part of the other challenge that we face ongoing is the stigma and the misinformation in community and the perceptions that are built. And so being able to really provide the reality, the truth, what's going on, what's working. On October 1st at the Cowichan Community Center at 6:30 p.m., we, as community organizations, are hosting an information night for the general public to come in and get answers. We will have people with lived and living experience there. We have Guy Felicia, who you may recognize his name as somebody who advocates for people with lived and living experience. You'll see him on the news. He's coming to be our keynote. We will have bylaw, RCMP, local leaders talking about the true reality so that we can quell some of the misinformation that's out there on social media. And really, again, ask our community beyond here to work together with us on a solution. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to Director Douglas and then myself to close, I hope.
Yeah, I'll be quick. Just to go back to Director McClinton's question about what we can anticipate if we're not successful in getting this funding through the federal and provincial government. What I'd envision is, particularly North Cowichan, City of Duncan, Cowichan Tribes, you're going to have to hire more bylaw enforcement officers, probably work with the RCMP to hire more police officers as well. And their focus is going to be on breaking up encampments, moving people off the sidewalk, and essentially playing this game of whack-a-mole, where we're moving people from one part of the community to another. Rather than affecting one business area, it's going to affect another group of businesses. Instead of one neighbor, it's going to affect another. And without actually arriving at any real solution, and the costs of that are going to fall on taxpayers, mainly in North Cowichan, Duncan, and folks in Cowichan Tribes, who obviously have very limited resources. So that's one potential scenario, but if we can all work together to advocate for the proposal outlined in today's presentation to get those supports, I think the future could look a lot different and a lot better for everybody.
Thank you. Under the policy of chair, I'll put myself back on the bottom and ask Director Stone and Ishdash. Director Stone first.
I'll try and keep it short. And sorry for the emotion. The stories are really important, and I think if we could even have those shared with us, because we're going to UBCM next week, I think it would be really helpful. A lot of people can connect policy pieces to stories that connect with them and maybe see that there's a better path. And I would just say, I encourage all of our colleagues when we're at UBCM to demand, and I put it in all caps in my notes, the investment needed to make this happen, and hopefully on a compressed time frame. Because the reality is, and Director Douglas said it, it's not only going to be the way that he expresses. You can see what's happening in Victoria right now. It's going to continue to get worse and more expensive. And there may be a time where we can get that close to the funding that's needed from senior levels of government, and we're all going to have to chip in a little bit. But in my mind, that's going to be less expensive than more bylaw, more RCMP, and we need to be prepared to step up when that time comes. And when you get that pushback, remember that all the people that contribute to that, every one of our taxpayers, whether they're through their federal, provincial, or local taxation, it's improving the quality of life for everyone. So if they're complaining about homelessness issues, you're improving their quality of life by addressing it. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Ishdash.
Thank you, Chair, and Director Stone's comments kind of create a good segue of where I was going to ask, and I'll ask a touchy subject in the community. Have you had any luck of trying to bring the other community advocacy group that in a way is working against you in more alignment with you, and reached out to them and to have discussions to be part of the action rather than being reactive and possibly a detractor to the good work you're doing? It has a postal code in the name, and I would hope that we could bring them in alignment with you. I have to bring up those touchy, hard things to say because we do have a group in the community that has, in a way, sometimes tried to get in the way. And I think if we can bring that group in an alignment with what you're doing and the great work you're doing, I think we'll see great success. So just, again, part of that bringing everybody to the table together and having the conversations as a group and rather than in silos. And I was just curious if you've had any success on that. Of course, and it takes both sides being willing to do that.
So I think that's a good way to start, is that it takes both sides to be willing to do that. I cannot tell you the countless number of hours that I've spent meeting with different groups over the years, different members of that particular group and others, going to meetings that they've hosted, inviting them to meetings that were hosted, inviting them to seats on different tables. And people have to be willing to, to work together. So our hope is always that, yes, they would continue, they would work with us on supporting solutions. But sometimes, and my experience has been that sometimes solutions that as we see them are not solutions as others see them. So we have found some people that have come along and said, yes, we recognize that this is working and that we support this. And in the next breath say, but we also think it's just bringing more people here. So if everyone can work on having those conversations, then that helps. But the door is always open.
Newly appointed Director Callio.
Thank you, Chair McGonigal. In regards to my fellow councillor and director at CVRD comment, first of all, I'd like to say that there's a great presentation today. There's a lot of good information that came here, and I think you guys are doing great work. And I will say that, there's a lot of good things that came out in your report today, and your delegation's presentation. And just that, I think that everybody needs to have an open mind, and I think that's one thing that myself personally, I like to say about myself, is I have an open mind. And I think that my fellow councillors and also the mayor across the table from me can say that as a councillor, I may be new and I'm trying to learn the ropes, but I'd like to say that, you know, I have that open mind, and I like to see both sides, and then I like to make my decision. Do I always make the right decision? Well, some of my fellow councillors and the mayor might not say so, but that's a difference of opinion. And so, speaking to Councillor Istash's and Director Istash's comment about the group that has V9L for its part of its nomiker, he's never been to one of our meetings, and in all reality, he came to our open houses that we had, and you know, anybody who came to there, I think that I just like to say that that group is not working against what was brought forward here today. I think that that group is trying to put a hand out to the community itself, who are in the business community, whose businesses are affected by the homeless and the crime that's happening in the streets, and people who are losing their businesses to the fact that, you know, this is going on, and you know, people won't attend the York Street area because of what they perceive as you know, lawlessness that's down there. I think that that's totally wrong, because I go through there all the time, and I think that our bylaw and our police officers do a pretty good job of keeping things under control. Yeah, you know, I just like to say that sometimes somebody else's perception on the outside is not the same as what's on the inside. And I think that some people and some people in the community need to realize that there's good work being done. You know, is everything, you know, palatable to all the community? Probably not. But in that case, you know, you need to educate yourself more. Thank you.
Thank you. If we can just state, and I apologize for the length of this. Everybody's getting a little antsy and probably needs a break of some sort. I want to personally thank each and every one of you who has presented today. And you can tell by the attentiveness that this is a topic that we all embrace. And if nothing else, if you can't take anything away from the last hour and a half, yes, that's how long it's been, about the regionality of the problem. In the point-in-time count, for instance, it's pointed out that 23% are from the Lake Cowichan area, whether that's Yubo, Lake Cowichan, Missachi Lake, Honeymoon Bay. And in the same presentation, stated the increased services that were provided within the core for those who are marginally housed or on the street. You go to where the services are if it is not provided within the area you reside in. And that's unfortunate, but that shows the regionalism of the conundrum that we are in. I struggle personally when someone reaches out and asks for help. And that's the first point to recovery. You have to reach bottom before you ask for help. And to look them in the eye and say, I'm sorry, there is no option for you, is detrimental not only to that person asking for help, but to the community that they reside in and everyone involved. Everyone is a father, an uncle, and there are two sides to the coin. So if we can just remember that as we move forward, that there are solutions, but not everybody is going to agree with everything. That's why there are two sides of the coin, so someone can win the flip of the toss. With that, I want to say Haichka, Kleko, for your presentation, and wish you well when you return. And I'm going to apologize to my next presenter, who has been sitting quite carefully listening, and I appreciate your attentiveness, but I do need a break. Back in 2 minutes. And we're live again, ladies and gentlemen. Back to the agenda. I will turn to Ms. Boyd to bring us to our next item, please.
Thank you, Chair. We have no correspondence or information items. We move to 7 reports. Report from the Facilities and Transit Division regarding discontinuation of transit fare tickets and full transition to electronic fare products for information.
Thank you.
Thank you. This item is in regards to the discontinuation of transit fare tickets and the full transition to the electronic fare system on transit, also known as UMO. A staff report was presented in March 2023 that explained the transition plan for the full electronic fare strategy, which is to accept electronic fares only on transit. A paper day pass is still going to be offered when purchased on board. This particular report is to advise that as of October 1st, 2024, current transit fare paper products will no longer be sold, as BC Transit is transitioning all systems to eliminate the paper products. When UMO was implemented in November 2023, staff advised that the discounted paper tickets, which is buy 9 and receive 10, would be maintained for a transition period. This is the update to advise that we are proceeding with a full transition to an electronic system and that we will no longer be selling the paper products. Since the percentage of sales for paper tickets is fairly low, it's around 12% of sales, staff do not expect the discontinuing of the tickets to have much effect on the budget. Thank you.
And I see Mr. Wright is online if there are any concerns or questions that need to be answered. I have Director Wilson. Anyone else while I'm looking around? Director Morrison. So Director Wilson and Morrison, please.
Thank you very much. Not expected to have much effect on the budget. You haven't got any rough numbers as to what that might be?
The expectation is that folks who are buying the tickets will transition to a different product. So it may not be specifically the budget line item of ticket sales, but it will be like absorbed in either a cash sale or a transition to a monthly pass.
Lovely, thank you.
Thanks.
Director Morrison.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, through you to staff. When I was reading this, I was trying to sort of ascertain the impact that this may have on the organizations that provide free passes to customers and clients of theirs. And I'm just a little curious as to any feedback that you may have had from United Way and other organizations with this. I see there's a move in there. Perhaps you can explain what the alternative is going to be with this and whether or not there will be an impact on that socioeconomic group that's currently using them.
Thank you. So the Cowichan Valley Regional District, we offer a transit assistance program which provides free transit tickets through the United Way to different agencies in the Cowichan Valley. And the United Way has a similar program in different regions as well. What's going to be offered there is instead of a ticket, it's a paper token, and it'll have a QR, it's a slip of paper that can still be distributed by those agencies to individuals. So that will be very limited impact. It'll just be a different looking product that we're providing. We've worked fairly extensively with BC Transit and different agencies in the region who do purchase products, transit fare products to provide to their clients. So for example, we've worked with different agencies and now many of them are onboarded with BC Transit directly. So what they'll be doing is they'll be issuing products, like they'll be purchasing their monthly passes or providing them in a card, whatever product works for them, and then they'll be paying for those products directly through BC Transit. So we have worked a lot to make sure that The agencies, particularly who buy in bulk or who do provide products, have an option. And then, likewise, the tickets can still be purchased in bulk by agencies who aren't themselves going to be doing it.
And a follow-up?
Well, just curious if Mr. Wright might have any experience in this transition, and in regards to my previous question to staff as to experience in other jurisdictions?
Yeah, certainly through the chair. Our experience is all pretty fresh because we're doing this concurrently across most of the province at the same time. But this is part of a fairly comprehensive sort of strategy to move people to electronic fare. So obviously the technology behind the electronic fare required a significant investment. Most of that investment was funded by the provincial and federal levels of government, 80% of the costs through the Invest in Canada Infrastructure Program, ISIP. The fare payment technology we initially gently encouraged people. We're now at the later stage where we're being a little more forthright and saying we're going to get rid of the paper fare products as part of that, in pursuant to your question about how social service agencies in particular might be able to adjust to this change from paper tickets. So some social service agencies would buy a sheet of 10 tickets or several sheets at a time. We have a ticket program where we can print off QR code type tickets. So it's a little bit different, but it works the same way. And then we also are working, as Rochelle Rondeau mentioned, that to get as many of the really popular social service agencies, so the Ministry of Children and Families, for instance, which buys a number of passes, monthly passes and sort of individual tickets, for them to be a vendor and them to be able to top up individual accounts. So the system is account based and it becomes attached to the individual that's using it, but that person can have a card or use their phone if they have one. And so the agency can load up someone's individual card and the card can be replaced if needed.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, just through to whoever, I'm sure that with this being rolled out throughout the province and especially through the Cowichan Valley Regional District, that there will be a collaborative communication splits on the transition. I know we have indicated that it is coming, but now that it's here, I'm hoping that it can be inundated in social media, et cetera, and newsletters or whatever, so that we can share it proactively before October 1st. Thank you. And that was just for information, so moving on, Ms. Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. Report from the Facilities and Transit Division regarding encroachment agreement for transit stops and infrastructure within the municipality of North Cowichan.
Ms. Rondeau.
Thank you. Yes, this is really kind of considered a housekeeping exercise to incorporate all the transit stop infrastructure that's located in North Cowichan into one comprehensive agreement. Formerly, we had two agreements, one that expired in September 2022, and an existing agreement for two benches that expires in 2026. So this agreement would replace both, and it covers all the transit infrastructure, just laying out roles and responsibilities as outlined in the draft agreement.
And there is a recommendation. You're moving, Director Stone, seconded by Director Segal. Any discussion on that? Call the question. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That motion carries. Thank you. Ms. Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. Report from the Facilities and Transit Division regarding transit service agreement with Halalt First Nation.
Ms. Rondeau, please.
Thank you. This agreement is a renewal of the agreement with Halalt First Nation, as the current 5-year agreement expires September 30th, 2024. And the new agreement specifies the same terms and costs as noted in the original. The original agreement specified incremental costs plus CPI each year, and our current 2024 cost is $2,172. Thank you.
We have a mover and a seconder. Looking for discussion. Director Douglas.
I was just moving it.
Great. I have a mover, a seconder, and a thirder. Any comments or questions? For that long wait, we appreciate the the way this has gone. So thank you both for the presentation, and I'll call the question. All in favor? You thought I wasn't going to, didn't you? Opposed, if any? That motion carries. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Rondo.
Thank you.
Mr. Wright. Ms. Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. We have no unfinished business, no new business. I'm not seeing anyone in the gallery for question period. I would have a motion to adjourn, please.
A whole bunch of hands went up and a whole bunch seconded. All in favor? Opposed, if any? We are